Captain Raven Walsh stood at parade rest before the assembled Catharian High Command, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the pristine white of her United Earth Defense Force instructor's uniform. The crystalline chamber of the Stellar Military Academy stretched high above, its transparent walls revealing the purple-hued sky of Kether Prime. Before her, 12 towering figures sat in ornate chairs, their scaled bodies adorned with ceremonial armor that caught the light of 3 setting suns. First Commander Ixil, distinguished by his silver-streaked scales and ceremonial crown, leaned forward. Captain Walsh, your reputation precedes you. Though we respect Earth's military achievements, many doubt that your physical limitations could offer anything of value to our warriors. Walsh maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened slightly. The Catharians were renowned across the galaxy for their natural armor and immense strength. The average warrior stood 3 meters tall and could lift several tons. Their military doctrine relied heavily on overwhelming force and endurance. With respect, Commander, Walsh replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I believe that's precisely why I'm here. The galaxy is changing. Raw power isn't enough anymore. A rumble of disapproval spread through the assembled command staff. Second Commander Vex, a battle-scarred veteran with obsidian scales, rose to his full height. You suggest our methods are obsolete? We have conquered 12 star systems with our current doctrine. Walsh allowed herself a small smile. And lost 3 in the past year to the Nomad Collective, a species physically weaker than humans. They adapted. Will you? Silence fell over the chamber. The recent defeats at the hands of the Nomad Collective were a sore point for the proud Catharian military. Their traditional tactics had proved ineffective against the Nomads' guerrilla warfare and unconventional strategies. First Commander Ixil raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. You have 1 lunar cycle, Captain. Prove your worth with our newest warrior cadets. If they show improvement, we will consider implementing your methods more broadly. If not, he left the threat unspoken. I'll need full access to your training facilities and permission to modify the standard training regimen, Walsh stated, unfazed. Granted, Ixil replied. Commander Vex will oversee your progress. Vex's expression darkened, but he nodded curtly. Walsh recognized the political move. Assigning the most traditionally minded commander to supervise her was either a setup for failure or a chance to convert the strongest opposition. The next morning, Walsh stood before 30 Catharian cadets in the Academy's main training arena. Their massive frames made the spacious chamber feel cramped, their scales ranging from deep bronze to iridescent black. All wore the traditional training armor that marked them as elite cadets. Your current combat training, Walsh began, pacing before them, focuses on maximizing your natural advantages. Strength, armor, endurance, all valuable assets. She stopped, turning to face them directly. And all completely useless against an opponent who never gives you the chance to use them. A cadet in the front row, his scales a brilliant copper, stepped forward. With respect, human, our natural capabilities. Attack me, Walsh interrupted. The cadet blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. I what? You heard me, cadet. ZYX Tau, ma'am. And I cannot. You are half my size and unarmored. It would be dishonorable. Walsh's smile turned predatory. Your honor will be intact, Cadet ZYX Tau. Attack me as you would any opponent. Full force. From his observation platform, Commander Vex leaned forward with interest. ZYX Tau looked to his fellow cadets, who nodded encouragingly. With a resigned sigh, he dropped into a standard Catharian combat stance, feet wide, all 4 arms raised in striking position. Walsh simply stood there, hands clasped behind her back. The cadet launched forward with impressive speed for his size, his primary right arm swinging in a devastating arc toward Walsh's head. What happened next left the entire room in stunned silence. Walsh seemed to flow like water, her movements so subtle it was almost invisible. One moment she was standing in the path of the attack, the next she was inside Zoexdal's guard. Her hand struck 3 precise points on his arm and torso. The massive cadet crashed to the ground, his right side completely limp. First lesson, Walsh announced to the shocked audience, helping ZYX Tau to his feet as feeling returned to his paralyzed side. is that the galaxy doesn't care about your advantages. It cares about how you use them. Commander Vex's scales rippled with interest. Perhaps, he thought, this assignment wouldn't be the waste of time he'd expected. The training arena echoed with the sound of massive bodies hitting the floor. 2 weeks had passed since Captain Walsh's first demonstration, and the changes in the cadets were already evident. Zyxtal, who had become an unofficial leader among his peers, moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible for his huge frame. "Again," Walsh commanded, walking between the paired cadets. "Remember, size is not your only advantage. Use your opponent's expectations against them." Commander Vex watched from his usual position on the observation platform, his scaled fingers drumming thoughtfully on the railing. The cadets' traditional combat instructors flanked him, their expressions a mixture of dismay and fascination. "She's destroying centuries of combat doctrine," Master Instructor Krell muttered, his azure scales darkening with disapproval. "These techniques, they're beneath our warrior's dignity." Vex's eyes narrowed. "Are they? Watch closer." Below, Walsh had called the cadets to attention. "Today, we move beyond basic deflection and redirection. Your natural armor and strength are gifts, but they can become crutches." She gestured to Zyxtal. "Your demonstration partner, if you're willing." The copper-scaled cadet stepped forward eagerly. In the past weeks, his initial skepticism had transformed into keen interest. "Of course, Captain. Strike at me with all 4 arms, full speed," Walsh instructed. "Cadets, observe carefully. Particularly watch my footwork." Zyxtal attacked with precision, his 4 massive arms launching a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Walsh moved like shadow through water, her feet tracing complex patterns as she slipped between the strikes. Each movement was minimal, efficient, using Zyxtal's own momentum to keep him off balance. "Now," Walsh called out, still weaving through the attack, "notice how I'm not blocking. Catharian limbs are too powerful to stop directly. Instead," she touched Zyxtal's lower right arm lightly as it passed, and suddenly the massive cadet spun, his own force turning him sideways. "We adapt." The demonstration continued, but Vex's attention was drawn to movement at the arena's entrance. First Commander Ixal had arrived, accompanied by several members of the High Command. Their timing wasn't coincidental. The halfway point of Walsh's trial period approached. "Enough," Walsh called out. The cadets immediately formed ranks, their discipline undiminished despite the unconventional training. "Pair up. Practice the redirections I've shown you. Remember, feel the flow of your opponent's energy. Don't fight it, guide it." She approached the observation platform, saluting sharply as she noticed Ixal. The first commander's expression was unreadable. "Interesting methods, Captain," Ixal remarked, his voice carrying in the vast space. "But I question their practical application. These techniques seem better suited for smaller species." Walsh met his gaze steadily. "Permission to demonstrate with a more challenging opponent, sir?" Ixal's head tilted slightly. "What did you have in mind?" "Commander Vex," Walsh said, turning to the battle-scarred veteran, "would you honor me with a spar?" A ripple of excitement passed through the cadets. Vex was legendary among their ranks, undefeated in traditional combat for 3 decades. His obsidian scales bore the marks of countless victories. Vex studied Walsh for a long moment before nodding. "It would be my pleasure, Captain." He descended from the platform, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human instructor. "Standard rules," Walsh said, taking position. "First to score 3 decisive hits wins." Vex dropped into a fighting stance, all 4 arms raised. His experience showed in his positioning. Unlike Zyxtal's first attempt weeks ago, Vex left no obvious openings. The chamber fell silent as predator faced predator. Then Vex moved. His attack was blindingly fast, decades of combat experience evident in every motion. Where Zyxtal's strikes had been powerful but straightforward, Vex launched a complex series of feints and genuine attacks, using his lower arms to guard while his upper limbs struck. Walsh's movement was pure efficiency, but even the cadets could see she was being pressed hard. Vex's experience let him adapt quickly to her evasions, cutting off escape routes, forcing her to stay mobile. The first exchange ended in a draw, both fighters separating to reassess. A thin smile crossed Vex's face. "You move well, Captain, but you cannot evade forever." "That's the point, Commander," Walsh replied, her own smile genuine. "The galaxy is full of stronger opponents. Victory doesn't always require defeating them. Sometimes surviving is enough." The second clash was even more intense. Vex pressed his advantage of reach and strength, but Walsh turned his attacks aside like a leaf in the wind. Then, in a moment that drew gasps from the observers, she slipped past his guard and struck 3 precise points on his chest. Vex staggered, his upper right arm temporarily numbed. "First point to you, Captain." The spar continued, each exchange a deadly dance of power versus precision. When it ended, both fighters were breathing hard, and the score stood even at 2 points each. "Final round," Walsh said, settling into her stance. "Shall we show them what true combat looks like?" Vex's scales rippled with anticipation. Indeed. No holding back? None. What followed would be talked about in the Academy for years to come. The final exchange was a blur of motion, Vex's overwhelming power meeting Walsh's fluid precision. It ended with both fighters on the ground, Walsh having used Vex's own strength to throw him, while his tail sweep took her legs out from under her. They rose together, respect evident in their expressions. "A draw," Ixil announced from above. "Most illuminating." Walsh turned to the cadets, who stood in awe. "That's today's real lesson. True combat isn't about domination, it's about adaptation. Size, strength, speed, these are tools, not guarantees. The greatest warrior isn't the strongest or the most skilled, but the one who can adapt to any situation." Vex brushed off his armor, his eyes gleaming. "Perhaps," he rumbled, "there is more to human combat philosophy than I first assumed." The cadets burst into applause, their traditional restraint forgotten. Even the skeptical instructors were nodding thoughtfully. Ixil's voice cut through the celebration. "Impressive, Captain Walsh. But remember, you still have half a cycle to prove these methods work for our warriors, not just for you." Walsh nodded, already planning her next lessons. The real challenge was just beginning. The warning sirens shattered the pre-dawn quiet of the Stellar Military Academy. Captain Walsh was already moving before the second tone sounded, years of combat instincts driving her from sleep to full alertness in seconds. The purple sky outside her quarters flickered with unfamiliar lights. "Captain," Zuextal's voice boomed through her comm unit. "Nomad vessels have breached the outer defense grid. They're targeting the Academy." "Status of the cadets?" Walsh demanded, securing her combat suit. "Assembled in the main training arena as per protocol. Commander Vex is coordinating with planetary defense forces, but our primary fleet is engaged in the Dendari sector." "A deliberate timing," Walsh muttered. "They waited until our strongest defenses were committed elsewhere. Meet me at the arena." The halls echoed with organized chaos as she ran, support staff and junior instructors moving with practiced efficiency to battle stations. The Nomads had chosen their moment well. The Academy's defensive capabilities were significant, but designed mainly for training purposes. Walsh entered the arena to find all 30 cadets in formation, their training armor gleaming under the emergency lights. Commander Vex stood before them, his obsidian scales reflecting the red alert beacons. "Report," Walsh called out, joining him. 3 Nomad strike cruisers," Vex growled. "They've deployed dropships. Planetary defense forces are engaged but stretched thin. First Commander Ixil is coordinating from Central Command, but..." He hesitated. "But we're on our own," Walsh finished. "They're targeting the Academy specifically." "Why?" "The weapons vault," Zyxtal spoke up. "We house prototype weapons here for training purposes. If the Nomads captured them..." A distant explosion rocked the building. Walsh's mind raced through options. The cadets were trained, but untested in real combat. Traditional Catharian doctrine would have them form a defensive line, using their natural advantages to hold position. That would get them killed. "Commander," Walsh said, turning to Vex, "these cadets have been training in hybrid tactics for half a cycle. Permission to implement an unconventional defense strategy?" Vex studied her for a moment, another explosion punctuating the silence. The traditional response would play directly into the nomads' expectations, Walsh interrupted. They've studied your tactics. They're counting on them. The veteran commander's scales rippled with decision. The defense is yours, Captain. Cadets. Captain Walsh now holds tactical command. Walsh faced the assembled warriors in training. Everything we've practiced has been leading to this moment. The nomads expect you to fight like Catharians. We're going to show them something new. She quickly divided them into 5-person teams, mixing the naturally aggressive cadets with the more analytical ones. Team 1, led by Zyx, will appear to mount a traditional defense at the main entrance. Teams 2 and 3 will use the maintenance tunnels we mapped last week for flanking positions. The tunnels are too small for efficient movement, one cadet objected. Exactly, Walsh smiled. The nomads know this. They'll never expect you to use them. Teams 4 and 5, you're with me and Commander Vex. We're going to give them a lesson in adaptive warfare. The plan was quickly disseminated. As the cadets moved to their positions, Vex approached Walsh. An interesting strategy, but if it fails, then we fail trying something new, Walsh replied, checking her tactical display. Better than failing doing what they expect. The first wave of nomad forces hit the Academy's main entrance exactly where Walsh predicted. They were humanoid but smaller, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic augmentations that made them lethal despite their size. They moved with practiced precision, clearly expecting to face a straightforward Catharian defense. What they got instead was chaos. Zyx's team engaged them head-on, but instead of holding position, they used Walsh's techniques to constantly shift the battlefield. The massive Catharians moved with unexpected agility, never presenting a solid line to attack, drawing the nomads forward. The invaders pressed their advantage, right into the trap. Teams 2 and 3 erupted from maintenance access points, their huge frames squeezing through spaces the nomads had dismissed as tactically irrelevant. The surprise was complete. Before the nomads could adjust their strategy, they found themselves caught between waves of Catharian cadets who fought unlike anything in their tactical databases. Now, Walsh commanded over the comm. Her teams descended from above, using maintenance lifts and construction scaffolding to attack from unexpected angles. She moved among her troops, calling out adjustments, turning the battle into a fluid dance of position and counterposition. The nomads fought well, but their strategy relied on exploiting the known weaknesses of Catharian combat doctrine. Against this hybrid of human adaptability and Catharian power, they found themselves outmatched. Commander Vex proved surprisingly adept at the new tactics, his decades of experience finding fresh expression in unexpected ways. He and Walsh worked in tandem, coordinating the defense like a combat symphony. The battle raged for an hour before planetary reinforcements finally arrived. They found the Academy grounds littered with disabled nomad forces and their equipment. Not a single cadet had been lost, though many sported minor injuries. In the aftermath, First Commander Ixil surveyed the scene from the Academy steps. The captured nomad soldiers were being processed, their cybernetic systems studied for intelligence. Remarkable, he said as Walsh and Vex approached to report. The nomads have never failed so completely in a raid. Their tactics are usually perfect against traditional Catharian defenses, Walsh finished. That was their weakness. They prepared for what they knew, not what we could become. Vex nodded, his battle-scarred scales gleaming in the restored lighting. The cadets performed beyond expectation. Their ability to adapt, to fight in ways no one anticipated. This is the future of Catharian combat doctrine. Ixil's expression was thoughtful. Indeed, Captain Walsh, I believe your trial period can be considered successfully completed. The High Command will want to expand this training program significantly. He paused, mandibles clicking in. What Walsh had learned was amusement. Assuming you're willing to accept a permanent position? Walsh looked at the cadets, who were helping restore order to the Academy grounds. Zyx caught her eye and saluted, his copper scales bearing proud new scratches from the battle. I'd be honored, First Commander, she replied. After all, we're just getting started. The Academy's Great Hall hummed with activity as delegates from both Earth and Kether Prime gathered for the formal recognition ceremony. 2 months had passed since the Nomad raid, and the ripples of that victory had spread far beyond the Academy's walls. Captain Walsh stood at attention beside Commander Vex as First Commander Ixil addressed the assembled dignitaries. The massive chamber, usually reserved for graduation ceremonies, now hosted representatives from 12 species, all eager to witness the unprecedented cooperation between humans and Catharians. The success of the Academy's defense, Ixil was saying, represents more than a single victory. It marks the beginning of a new era in galactic military doctrine. He gestured to the assembled cadets, their armor polished to a mirror shine. These warriors represent the future, one where strength and adaptability work in harmony. Walsh studied her cadets with pride. They stood taller now, their bearing reflecting not just their natural Catharian confidence, but a deeper understanding of combat's true nature. Zyxtal, newly promoted to training lieutenant, caught her eye and offered a subtle nod. The ceremony continued as Admiral Chion of the United Earth Defense Force took the podium. "The alliance between our species has always been one of necessity," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Today, it becomes one of genuine respect and understanding." Walsh's mind drifted to the changes of the past weeks. After the raid, other military academies across Catharian space had demanded similar training programs. Commander Vex, once the strongest skeptic, had become her strongest advocate, traveling to other installations to help implement the new hybrid combat doctrine. But more significant were the subtle changes. In the training arena, veteran Catharian instructors now worked alongside human combat specialists, each learning from the other. The rigid hierarchy that had defined Catharian military structure for centuries was evolving, becoming more fluid and responsive. The sound of her name brought Walsh back to the present. "Captain Walsh," Ixil announced, "step forward." She approached the massive ceremonial platform, aware of all eyes upon her. Ixil stood holding a ceremonial weapon, the Blade of Instruction, traditionally reserved for only the highest-ranking Catharian combat masters. "Your methods challenged our most basic assumptions about warfare," Ixil continued. "In doing so, you have given us something far more valuable than tactical advantage. You have taught us to question, to adapt, and to grow beyond our limitations." The blade, nearly as tall as Walsh herself, was presented horizontally. In a break with tradition that caused murmurs among the Catharian elders, Ixil lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself closer to her height. "Accept this blade, not as a human instructing Catharians, but as a warrior who has earned her place among our greatest teachers." Walsh grasped the weapon with practiced ease, her months of training with Catharian weapons evident in her handling of the massive blade. She raised it in the traditional salute, then spoke the ancient words of acceptance in perfect Catharian, her voice ringing through the hall. The ceremony shifted to the practical demonstration that everyone had been anticipating. The cadets, led by Zyxtal, demonstrated their new fighting style for the assembled dignitaries. They moved with fluid grace, their natural strength enhanced rather than restricted by their new techniques. But the true highlight came when Walsh and Commander Vex took the floor for a demonstration bout. Their sparring had become legendary among the cadets, each match a display of how two radically different fighting philosophies could complement each other. They moved with practiced coordination, Vex's powerful strikes flowing seamlessly into Walsh's precise counters. What had once been a clash of opposites had evolved into a deadly dance, neither fighter diminished by the adaptation to the other's style. The bout ended in their now customary draw, drawing thunderous applause from the audience. As they bowed to each other, Walsh caught something unexpected in Vex's expression, not just respect, but genuine warmth. "Captain," he rumbled as they left the demonstration floor, "I owe you an apology." "For what, Commander?" "When you first arrived, I thought your assignment was a political gesture, humans attempting to prove their relevance in galactic military affairs." He paused, his scales shifting in what Walsh now recognized as embarrassment. "I was wrong. You have not just taught us new ways to fight. You have taught us new ways to think." Walsh smiled. "We've all learned, Commander. Your warriors showed me that adaptation isn't about abandoning strength, but about finding new ways to express it." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of speeches and formal recognitions. But the real meaning of the day was evident in the informal interactions, human instructors chatting easily with Catharian veterans, sharing insights and experiences without the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. As the event wound down, Walsh found herself on one of the Academy's observation balconies, watching the three sons of Kether Prime set in their complex dance. Admiral Chun joined her, holding 2 glasses of Earth whiskey. "Quite a change from your first day here," the Admiral observed, offering her a glass. Walsh accepted it with a nod. "The galaxy is changing, Admiral. The old divisions, the old assumptions about species and their limitations, they're all breaking down. Thanks in no small part to you." Chun studied her thoughtfully. "The Defense Force wants to expand this program significantly. We're thinking of establishing a joint training facility, somewhere both species can learn from each other as equals." Walsh took a sip of whiskey, considering the possibility. Below, she could see some of her cadets demonstrating their techniques to interested delegates, their movements confident and precise. "I'd like that," she said finally, "but on one condition." "Oh, we do it here, at the Academy. These warriors," she gestured to the cadets below, "they're not just students anymore. They're the teachers of what comes next." Chun smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that. First Commander Ixo already proposed the same thing. The paperwork is being drawn up as we speak." Walsh raised her glass in a toast. "To the future of combat training." "To breaking expectations," Chun replied, clinking her glass against Walsh's. 1 year after the Nomad raid, the Stellar Military Academy had transformed beyond recognition. The once rigid training grounds now housed a diverse mix of species, with humans and Catharians working side by side to forge a new generation of warriors. Captain Walsh, now Colonel Walsh, stood in her favorite observation post, watching the morning drills with quiet satisfaction. Below, Training Lieutenant Zyx Tao led a mixed group of human and Catharian recruits through advanced combat forms. The copper-scaled warrior had become the embodiment of the new hybrid fighting style, his massive frame moving with a fluid grace that still surprised visitors to the Academy. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Commander Vex's deep voice rumbled behind her. "The High Command received another request for our graduates today. The Centaurian Defense Force wants a full training contingent." Walsh nodded, unsurprised. The success of their program had sparked a revolution in military training across the galaxy. "How many does that make now?" 15 species in the past 3 months alone. Vex moved to stand beside her, his battle-scarred armor gleaming in the morning light. "Though I suspect some are more interested in studying our methods than learning them." "Let them study," Walsh replied with a slight smile. "The real lesson isn't in the techniques themselves." Below, Zyx Tao was demonstrating a complex maneuver that combined Catharian strength with human adaptability. A human recruit attempted the move, her smaller frame requiring different points of balance, but the principle remained the same. The Catharian students watched intently, their own practice incorporating elements of human movement patterns. "The Nomads haven't attempted another raid since our defense," Vex observed. "Our intelligence suggests they've abandoned their expansion plans in this sector entirely." "Because we changed the equation," Walsh said. "Their entire strategy relied on exploiting predictable responses. We're not predictable anymore." The morning's training session shifted to paired combat. Humans and Catharians squared off, each adapting their natural abilities to complement or counter their partner's style. What had once seemed like insurmountable physical differences had become opportunities for innovation. "The old guard still grumbles," Vex admitted, his scales rippling with amusement. "Yesterday, Master Krell complained that we're diluting traditional Catharian combat arts." Walsh raised an eyebrow. "The same Master Krell I saw practicing human mobility techniques last week?" "The very same. Though he insists he's merely studying the enemy's weaknesses." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion below. A new group had entered the training arena, representatives from the Arcanian Confederation, a species known for their crystalline bodies and rigid social structure. They moved with careful precision, their faceted forms catching the light. "Ah yes," Vex rumbled, "the latest observers." They requested a comprehensive demonstration of our integrated combat methods. Walsh watched as Zyx Tao greeted the Arcanians with practiced diplomacy. The once brash cadet had grown into his role as an instructor, his natural Catharian pride tempered by genuine respect for other species' capabilities. "Show them," Walsh called down, her voice carrying clearly in the arena. Full integration demonstration, Protocol 7. Zyxtal's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. He began arranging the students in formation, humans and Catharians interspersed in a pattern that would have seemed chaotic to traditional military observers, but contained a deeper order. What followed was a display that had become the Academy's signature. A complex combat dance that showcased how different species could work together, each enhancing the other's natural abilities. Humans darted between their massive Catharian partners, turning potential vulnerabilities into advantages. Catharians used their strength not just to strike, but to create opportunities, their movements flowing like liquid metal despite their size. The Arcanian observers stood motionless, their crystalline forms vibrating slightly, a sign of intense interest in their species. When the demonstration ended, their leader stepped forward. "Fascinating." The Arcanian's harmonic voice resonated through the arena. "We had heard rumors, but seeing it," they turned to face Walsh and Vex. "Our military doctrine has remained unchanged for 10,000 cycles. Perhaps it is time for evolution." Later that evening, Walsh sat in her office, reviewing training reports. The walls, once bare, now displayed artifacts from a dozen species, gifts from grateful students and diplomatic delegations. A knock at her door revealed Zyxtal, his copper scales dulled by a day's training. "Colonel," he said, entering at her gesture, "the Arcanian delegation has formally requested to join our program. They've offered to send their finest warriors as both students and instructors." Walsh leaned back in her chair. "Your assessment?" "Their physical capabilities are unique," Zyxtal replied thoughtfully. "Their crystalline bodies allow for energy manipulation that could add another dimension to our combat forms. And their strategic minds?" He clicked his mandibles appreciatively. "Draft an integration proposal," Walsh decided. "Work with Commander Vex on the logistics. We'll need to modify some of the training facilities to accommodate their environmental needs." Zyxtal nodded, but remained standing. "Colonel, do you ever think about that first day? When you ordered me to attack you?" Walsh smiled at the memory. "Sometimes. Though I remember more clearly what you did afterward. You asked why. That's what marked you as different, Zyxtal. You didn't just accept defeat. You sought to understand it. It changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just for me, but for all of us. We thought we were learning new ways to fight. Instead, we learned new ways to grow," Walsh finished. "That's the real legacy of this academy now. Not just training warriors, but breaking down the barriers between species, showing that our differences can make us stronger together." Through the office window, the three sons of Kether Prime painted the sky in brilliant hues. In the distance, construction crews worked on the Academy's new expansion, additional training grounds and accommodation facilities for the growing number of species seeking to learn their methods. "The galaxy is changing," Walsh mused, standing to watch the sunset. "The old ways of thinking about strength and weakness, about what different species can or can't do, they're fading away. What we're building here, it's more than just a new combat style. It's a new way of seeing each other." Zyxtal moved to stand beside her, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. And it all started with one human instructor who wasn't afraid to challenge a room full of Catharian warriors. Walsh laughed. "No, Lieutenant. It started with warriors like you, who were willing to learn. Everything else just followed naturally." As darkness fell over the academy, lights came on in the training arenas where evening sessions continued. The sound of mixed species training together drifted up, human voices calling out in Catharian, Catharian instructors demonstrating human techniques, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of warriors learning to move as one, regardless of their origins. The future of combat had arrived, and it was more beautiful and complex than anyone could have imagined.